to Archer than he does to his own personal ethics. I don't know how they would have written it any other way without us hating him afterwards. Because if he had withheld it, they'd have to eventually tell us that he withheld it for that to matter, right? And at that point, you'd realize he's just a snake. And you don't want him on the ship anymore. And it would have ruined the character completely.
Yeah. Yeah. And interesting that you bring up that this episode is to introduce who Phlox is, because now we're getting this similarity that Phlox doesn't want to admit that he found it because he doesn't want to use the cure. And then Archer sort of backs him up. And so now they are in sync with each other. And so now they fit together and we can accept Phlox.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Archer does make a very big distinction that it goes against my personal moral and ethical beliefs. I'm doing it because I think it's what's right for Starfleet. However, this goes completely against what I believe in. And he makes that point before saying, I'm not out here to play God. However, on the flip side, this falls directly in line with Phlox's ethical beliefs as a scientist. And he never really fits how being a doctor fits into that. So he cares more about being a scientist than he does a doctor.
Yeah, because as a doctor, he should be wanting to give the...
Absolutely, all the time. Now, in fairness there too, like we have the Hippocratic Oath, right? But that's not true of other worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be a disconnect in how they view what a doctor is supposed to be. I also, not that this has anything to do with the episode of the podcast we're doing, but I did find it interesting. We did see, because this is such an episode of introducing who Phlox is, we did see a romantic relationship starting with Phlox in here too, which he had no idea how to handle.
Oh yeah, that was pretty cute.
So I mean, that's just an honorable mention on the episode itself because I thought the episode was great. But yeah, as far as the Prime Directive, again, I hate it because I just don't think this is right. And I don't think it's right because, like you even said, let's go back in 10 years. What if they did gain enough technology? Why didn't we go back in 10 years? And if we weren't going to give them the answer now, why didn't we go back in 10 years and see how far they've come? And if they've come far enough, now you give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
You just left. And as far as we know, you never went back. I mean, there's no other mention of these people ever again in Star Trek history. Now, I get it because this came technically after all the other episodes. But by writing it this way, there's never a mention of them again. Therefore, you left and said, bye, good luck, you got 10 years.
Yeah.
Then you have 100 or 150 and you're all gone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the Prime Directive. On to Pen Pals, though.
Yes.
You should introduce this one. It is your episode.
So Pen Pals, if you remember, is the one where Data finds this ominous transmission out there. And it says, is anybody out there? And Data answers. And this is one with Sarjenka. And her planet, Selkunde Drema, is going through some major volcanic planetary instabilities. And we are deciding, do we help them or not? This is a season 2, episode 15. And we have, I think this is a great episode for Pulaski because she makes some pretty darn good points because Picard is wanting to be hands off, right? He's trying to follow the Prime Directive. No, we're not. And then it's Pulaski's like, well, it's a cry for help. They are requesting aid. And so that sort of goes to, what I talked about at the top of the episode, that if someone is requesting aid, then we can get around the Prime Directive. But this, I think, fully falls into that geological instability that we're not supposed to help. But then Pulaski sort of pushes that. So we're not going to help if their planet is being destroyed. We're not going to help in time of war. We're not going to help in time of slavery. Like she just keeps going, again, further and further.
It was both Picard and her that were trading off blows on this one.
Yes.
Because I had it in my notes that he had said, Give me one second.
Like, where do we draw the line? Is
okay.
the
So he says,
discussion.
what if it's an epidemic and not a geological event?
Yep.
What if it's a war? What if it's an oppressive government? So, and at that point, you do have to start thinking, well, which ones do we or don't we step in on? And he does say that the Prime Directive have many functions, but one of the biggest functions is to protect us from our own emotions, so that our emotions don't decide whether we do or don't interfere. But the Prime Directive just says we don't. But again, I just don't buy that. I don't buy that human beings have to have no emotions and decide strictly by this is the rule. There is no gray area. It seems ridiculous, and it's very ridiculous here. Now, you said she had great lines, and she does. I find myself agreeing with every single thing she says. Her and Geordi are very adamant that you have to do something. Picard is kind of trying to find, he's on the side of doing nothing, but he's trying to find the truth. Number one is kind of in the same boat, although he seems to be leaning more the other way with Geordi and Pulaski, although, again, not all the way. And then you have Data, Geordi, Pulaski on one side, and Worf, Starfleet on the other side.
Yes.
Which I thought, I don't like that writing, because they should have given him an ally somewhere. I mean, Riker seemed to start on that side with him and then kind of wane over the other way, but like he kind of just, he was kind of out there on an island by himself. I mean, kudos to him because he stayed there, but he should have had an ally, I thought, in the writing. But nothing changes Picard's mind until the moment that Data is commanded to break contact and instead isolates the signal and brings up a message of her asking directly for help.
Yeah.
And at that point, Picard says, well, now your voice in the dark or something like that,
Yep.
your whisper from the dark has become a plea. We cannot turn our backs. But most certainly he was ready to still not help up until that message.
Yeah, it was hearing, and to your point, that's when the emotions came into it, I believe.
Yeah, of course it did.
Yeah.
It has to.
Yeah.
But now, he may have cared before that moment, right? And most people would say he did because he's Picard. But he's always been very by the book. It's been my one critique of him as a captain is he was just, for a TV show, he was too by the book. Now I understand why you would be that way in real life. But for a TV show, he just seemed to be too by the book at times. This is one of those times. And he needed a loophole. And the loophole was actually physically hearing her say, I need your help.
Yeah. Finding that loophole, I think, is exactly right. Because, she's there twisting it. Is anybody out there? They're twisting it to be a formal request for aid. And
Correct.
Data answering it. So there's that communication, but they sort of lean back and like hold back. And it's like, well, we can't help them hiding behind the Prime Directive because they are not aware of interstellar life. And they're sort of using that as their excuse to not help, that we need to follow the Prime Directive, even though there was that loophole of that she was asking for help. So it's interesting you bring up Worf with that too, because as you were talking about how he's just so, by the book and staunch and nope, we're not going to help and this is wrong. Like it reminded me when you are dealing with people, you have to deal with the emotions. I mean, that's what it is. So it reminds me of the Discovery title, Universal Law is for Lackeys, Context is for Kings. And that's what we need to do when we are talking about a population. Like you just can't have this universal law, which is why the Prime Directive doesn't work. You cannot be black and white when you're dealing with civilizations, when you're dealing with life, when you're dealing with emotions. You need to go for each context. I think we do need to have some kind of, Prime Directive, but that's there to guide us, and that those in command are capable to make the distinction and to look at the context of each scenario, each situation, and do what is best for that situation.
I agree with you 100%. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second, though.
Of course you are.
Of course I am. At least this time I'm warning you. Where do you draw that line, though? See, because that's the argument on the other side is, context is for kings. but the captain of a ship doesn't get to be in that area. That line is drawn in the higher echelons of Starfleet. Now, I would say that's nonsense. That a captain should definitely get to make a call, especially if they cannot get word back to Starfleet at the time or not quick enough.
Yeah.
But people would say that no, the reason why it was okay in the Kelvin universe was that because that order came down from above to do that. That they get to decide which one time you can break the Prime Directive, not the captain of a ship. And I say that's nonsense.
Yeah, I think being out there, like in space, in the field, as you were, the captains do. But I see the danger where I thought you were going to go with playing devil's advocate. Like, then you're going to get a Captain Lorca or, someone with evil intent making these decisions. Then it's a slippery slope, because you could get
Correct,
someone that's making the wrong decisions, exploiting people, killing people, instead of looking at the context and doing best. Or then looking at it like, why are you saying that best is the best? Why is your best the best for them? That's playing God.
That's what happens in Dear Doctor.
Right.
Because it doesn't happen so much here because it's just one set of people that are going to die or live. There's no, in Dear Doctor, however, you have that, well, if we save them, then they don't ever move up. But if we don't save them, then they become the dominant species and have a chance to surpass their technological advances. We also obsess way too much about technological advances in Star Trek, but I get why. I mean, the show's about technology. It's not really about technology, but it's the main driving force of how they move around the galaxy. So I understand why, but why is the Mank moving up better than not moving up? And it's because they're not exploited anymore. I get it, but there's other ways to fix that particular issue than wiping out a race of people. In Pen Pals, it's they die or they don't die. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, they would be left to die because someone would try and figure out how to get the dilithium that didn't blow up the planet. And they'd only worry about the profits on that. But at least in this position, we're not dealing with that particular issue. It's either we stop the dilithium from destroying everyone or not. And once she says the words, "Data, will you help me?" I don't know if that's necessarily good enough to break the Prime Directive in the way they were using it in the first place. I would have broken the Prime Directive long before that moment. However, if you're going to stick with the Prime Directive, asking one person on a ship for help does not constitute formally asking for help of Starfleet, in my opinion. If you weren't going to accept looking for anybody as acceptance, then asking for Data shouldn't either.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's interesting because they talk about in Pen Pals like this cosmic plan, sort of going along with like, are we here to play God? And it's brought up again, well, aren't we a plan of that plan?
Right, correct. Exactly. Pulaski says it flat out. Well, how do you know we're not part of the plan to fix this? Which is always my argument. How do you know that us being here in the first place wasn't part of the initial plan? If there's some other being that's controlling this, God, the cosmos, fate, whatever, how do you know its intention wasn't to put me here so that didn't happen?
Well, and since I learned the word from watching Picard, I have in my notes, isn't that the height of hubris? Like, why do we think that, well, we are here, we can save this planet, we are part of the plan? Like, that's pretty huge ego. That's pretty huge responsibility that you're taking on just because we ran across these people, just because Data found this transmission. Well, she was putting it out there, right?
I agree, but I do think we still have a responsibility to do it. Because we can. I'm not saying create a whole new technology to do it or something like that. It wasn't even that hard to fix. They shot like 5 torpedoes at the planet and fixed the problem.
Yeah, but the people on the Drema planet couldn't do it.
I understand that, but you're going to let them die because they can't?
Survival of the fittest? Did I just say that out loud?
That's a hard.
It
and I'm
is.
the